Welcome to 2025 In Touch with Indiana Sports. John Alden with you. And this feels like the first time I've done this in a while. You know why? Because I'm finally recording the show when I normally do, which is it's normally earlier than when I'm doing it currently. Right now, I started this recording exactly at noon. Normally, I do this a little bit earlier, and I've already recorded one of our segments for this show. So I guess I did start a little bit earlier. But for those of you who have been following along the last couple of weeks, I have been doing a different type of shift at work, or at least double duty at work, to where I was having to record a lot of my shows the night before. And I was not happy about it, but I feel good. I feel better than the sickly version of myself that did a show on Monday, or I guess it was Sunday night. Um, and I'm glad I'm feeling much better, and I hope that comes across on today's show. And I hope you've had yourself a good week. Of course, it's Friday. It doesn't feel like a Friday, though, at all. And that doesn't mean it's a bad day, of course. But with having the middle of the week off due to holidays, it makes it, when it breaks up the work week like that, it makes things feel a little off center, off base, if you will. Feels more like a Tuesday or something like that. But thankfully, it's Friday heading into the weekend, and hopefully you had yourself a good New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. You want to know what I did on New Year's Eve? I fell asleep before 9 o'clock, and that was not by original design, but as we got into the evening hours on, I guess that was Tuesday now, right? We were going to go over to someone on my wife's side's, her cousin. We're going to go over to her house. We ended up stopping by for just a little bit, but I was so out of it and ready to go to sleep, due to a number of things, not feeling good, this new shift that I'm on. And I came home, turned on The Office, put on the little Peacock, turned on The Office, and unintentionally, I kind of figured I was going to fall asleep, and I didn't really have any plans to stay up until midnight. But who would have ever, I would have never thought that an adult human being such as myself would be so out of it to fall asleep 3 hours before midnight and then wake up. I slept for 12 hours that night, for those who give a crap, which might be none of you. But I like to share those types of things because I was very well rested heading into the new year. The coughs were still around, and they did progressively get worse for a few days. So I'm very glad I didn't do a show on Wednesday, because it would have sounded horrendous. Probably would have ended up not doing one for sick purposes. But we're on the upswing. It's a new year. I'm excited and glad to start the year with you all. And hopefully you guys are happy to be listening to this as well. As you see me mute the microphone for a little cough. I am feeling better, but it's not all the way gone. Been taking the medications necessary to feel better. But we're, like I said, on the upswing. And you know who else is on the upswing? Pause for water and for dramatic effect. You guessed it. That would be Indiana basketball. And I'll save most of my thoughts for the segment I did with Drew, but really couldn't have asked for much of a better start for Indiana heading into the new year, especially when Indiana's been in these situations before under Mike Woodson, and they don't get the job done in their first game back from the holiday break. And I know students are still on break and that type of thing, so you didn't have the stereotypical Big Ten atmosphere, but it was still a great game. You win by double digits. Ace Bailey goes off for 39 points against the Hoosiers, and you still have one of your better performances of the year. You do phenomenal from 3-point range. Umar Ballo answers the call when Malik Renew goes down with an injury. Hopefully things are going well for him, and hopefully we don't lose him for any extended period of time. But it would be interesting what Indiana would decide to do with their personnel moving forward into the rest of the Big Ten season without Malik Renew, because I do think they have enough variety in their roster to kind of switch or shift styles of play, maybe more so than they would like. But I do think they can do such a thing and potentially have success with it. And we kind of got a taste of that against Rutgers last night. So honestly, without further ado, let's just jump right into my segment with Drew Rosenberg as we talk about everything that took place with Indiana last night, and then on the other side, we'll dive into a lot of this college football playoff. I almost called it nonsense, but I'm so excited for the things that have taken place, at least when it comes to how different narratives have been disrupted. That it's nonsense for that, but I'm thrilled at what's taking place with the quarterfinals in the college football playoff. We'll talk about all that. Also, talk about some of the Indiana football transfer portal. They haven't had any new acquisitions, I don't believe, since we've last talked, but there have been a few announcements that have been made in regard to Indiana football that I do want to talk about. With certain personnel, certain players, and the like, and where some who are transferring out may be going, an outgoing player, and some of a piece of news that was revealed about him, and a few other things we'll see if we can get into. So without further ado, from HoosierIllustrated.com, Mr. Drew Rosenberg here to talk about Indiana basketball and, of course, the NBA. First guest of the year on In Touch with Indiana Sports, none other than Drew Rosenberg. Drew, how special do you feel right now as the first 2025 guest on a podcast that's affiliated with a site that you work for?
I feel really honored. I mean, you could have went with a lot of different guests. Could have went Alec, Kyler, Mitch. There's a ton of other options. I feel really honored right now.
Well, you should be, and I feel honored to have you. So welcome in. It is a Friday, a feel-good Friday. Hopefully it's a feel-good Friday for you. If it's not, hopefully we'll do our very best to make it better for you. But if you are an Indiana fan, an Indiana basketball fan, you probably at least feel pretty good about what happened last night against Rutgers. Of course, the 84-74 victory at home to reopen Big Ten play after some non-conference games that left a lot of people kind of questioning what to expect from this Indiana team, and rightfully so. And there's still some question marks, but Indiana did a lot of good things last night. Yeah. And one thing, I guess we'll start with this. 12 of 27 shooting from the three-point line. Mm-hmm. And, of course, there's a lot of factors that kind of go into why you may have that particular game, especially when you factor in the Malik Renew injury that happened so early on. But incredible performance, all things considered, for Indiana behind the arc, led by Mackenzie Mbako and Luke Goody and Trey Galloway, all with 3 points apiece, all with three-pointers apiece, throwing Kanan Carlisle and Anthony Leal with the three-pointer as well. Drew, just kind of your overall thoughts. I know I just kind of ramble there, as I typically do when I get things rolling, but just kind of your overall thoughts on what happened between Indiana and Rutgers last night.
Yeah, I mean, the three-pointers, it's something we've kind of wanted to see from Indiana, even going back 2-3 years under Mike Woodson. It seems like there's always been kind of the hesitancy to shoot the three ball. And over the last few games, there really hasn't been that. Even, you go back to the Nebraska game, Indiana wasn't making threes, Winthrop too, but they were still shooting them with confidence. And that's the thing you kind of want to see. And then you have a night like last night where they were shooting them no hesitation. Trey Galloway had a couple contested threes, which he normally would have passed up, but took them with confidence. And the threes fell. But it was the quality of the threes they were generating too. It wasn't just swing the ball around the perimeter and then take a contested three. A lot of the threes were coming off paint touches. There was one in particular I can think of. Miles Rice beat his man off the dribble, got to the paint, didn't really have an opening, and was able to flip it out to Mbako for a three. And those are the threes you need to be generating. It's not the moving the ball around the perimeter. Once the ball touches the paint, that's when you are generating the best three-point looks. And Indiana has guys capable of making it. It's just they need consistently generate better looks, and we saw that last night.
Yeah, and you mentioned Miles Rice, leading scorer last night with 21 points. Really a good, I don't want to say a prove-it performance from him, because we know he is capable of doing the things that he has done a little bit throughout the season. Really the biggest thing for him moving forward is, can he do this on a consistent basis? Can he do it away from home? And we saw him do well against Nebraska, but you're going to have some more difficult environments as you move into the Big Ten season. Things will get a little more difficult too as the season wears on. You have a little more fatigue. And they're not at that point yet, of course, but it'll be interesting to see how often Miles Rice is able to do what he was able to do last night. Umar Ballo, off the bench, 17 points. Of course, the storyline the game before was all the off the court issues, right? For him to be able to do what he did, especially in a Big Ten game, great stuff for Umar Ballo, of course.
Yeah, I mean, Indiana needed it. Malik Renew went down on the second play of the game, and we weren't really sure how much we were going to see Ballo. It seems like maybe not an injury, maybe a suspension, but Woodson has been very much not. He's very clearly said he's not going to talk about what's going on with Umar Ballo off the court. But Indiana really had no choice. Even I'm not sure if Ballo was supposed to play today, but once Renew went down, you did not have a choice, had to go to Ballo. And Ballo had maybe his best game as a Hoosier, 17 points, 12 rebounds, but 7 of those 12 were offensive rebounds. And that was a huge difference in this game. Indiana dominated on the glass, 18 offensive rebounds as a team. And the second chance points was also huge. 34 second chance points. Nearly half their points came off of their own misses. And Rutgers, I mean, Indiana exposed Rutgers front court, which is probably their biggest hole. You look at that team, they lost Cliff Amore at Alabama during the transfer portal last offseason. You know, all the talk is about Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, and deservedly so. And I'm sure we'll talk about Ace Bailey in a little bit.
Yeah.
But the rest of the roster is not good, and the front court is especially bad. And Umar Ballo took full advantage
in the front court last night.
Yeah. So Umar Ballo took full advantage, and it led to Indiana getting a lot of these looks. I mean, I talked about the generating threes off paint touches. The best 3-point look, whether like no matter what, it's statistically the best look of a 3-pointer is always coming off an offensive rebound. Ballo had a few. I think there was one to Mbako. I know I mentioned Miles Rice to Mbako. I think pretty sure his Ballo had an offensive rebound. He tipped right back to Mbako for a wide open catch and shoot 3. And those are the best looks. And if you're generating those looks consistently, Indiana's going to make more threes. And that's something, you know, everyone wants to see from this team.
You did just mention Ace Bailey and, of course, his night. But before we even get to that, the amount of pressure that had to have been on his shoulders in general going into this game, knowing that Dylan Harper was not going to play. You have 2 of your star freshmen, half of them are gone. Ace Bailey answers the call for Rutgers with 39 points. Really, the only major threat from this Rutgers team last night. And of course, we've seen really good players go off in Assembly Hall before, but what made this performance just so unique and special, I guess, for him and going against this Indiana team, of course?
Well, first, I think I'm just going to point this out. I saw this today. It was the second most points by an opponent ever in Assembly Hall.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Who was number 1? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I saw I think it was on the Rutgers. Rutgers posted it. They didn't post who number 1 was, but they said he was second. It also tied their freshman scoring record, which I would not be surprised if it gets broken by one of either Ace Bailey or Dylan Harper this year, because those guys are incredible. I know Dylan Harper didn't play, but that's the thing when you look at this Rutgers team. I think it was very clear from the opening tip they had no other offense than Ace Bailey. Indiana was throwing doubles. Within the first 5 minutes, or 10 minutes of the game, we saw Luke Goody, Anthony Leal, and Bryson Tucker were throwing different matchups, trying to figure out a way to get Ace Bailey off rhythm, and nothing seemed to work. Ace Bailey hit some of the toughest shots I've seen a college basketball player hit. There was a little stretch in the second half. He hit 2 straight fadeaway corner threes while being contested. But the only thing he couldn't do was really make free throws, 2 for 6, and then went to the line in between those 2 fadeaway threes and missed 2 free throws. And it was like the weirdest thing. But you look at Ace Bailey. I know if you were watching on Peacock, you saw Kevin Durant talking about him probably at least 3 times during the commercial breaks because they just kept airing the clip over and over. But deservedly so. I mean, Ace Bailey, you see a lot of Durant in him. His ability to get to his spots in the mid-range. He uses his length so well. Anthony Leal, I think we're going to talk about him a little bit. Anthony Leal was tremendous for Indiana, was the best defender on Bailey. But there were so many possessions where Leal was able to stay in front and force a tough shot, but Bailey's just so good, so gifted that he was just able to shoot right over the top of him. And there's a reason why he's a consensus top 5 pick in next year's draft.
Yeah, and I want to go back to Indiana for a second with Malik Renew's injury. And forgive me if I've missed something, but we don't know exactly what the extent of the injury is right now, correct?
No, we just know it seems like right knee is kind of the only thing we really know right now.
And if it is something long-term or potentially serious, what can we potentially expect from Indiana moving forward? Because I don't want to make it seem like that losing Malik Renew is a good thing, because it absolutely isn't. He gives you something that Umar Ballo doesn't, which is someone who can kind of stretch the floor a little bit. But at the same time, it does force Indiana to play at least a little bit smaller, because, yeah, you will have Umar Ballo probably rotate with Langdon Hatton every so often. But when you're forced to play 4 smaller guys on the floor as opposed to the 2 bigs and the 3 on the outside, you're going to see Indiana maybe have performances like they did last night, where they're shooting a whole lot more 3-pointers per game. And I'm not saying that they need to do that every single night, but if they're able to shoot the good shots that they were able to put together last night, that may be, I mean, a potential look at, I don't want to say the future for the Indiana offense, but I mean, what life could be like if Woodson ever decided to go in a different direction with how to structure a roster, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it forces Indiana to play 4 perimeter players, which is something I think a lot of people have been begging to see. I mean, they started out with it even with Ballo's injury, or before Renew's injury, with Ballo off the bench. It was Luke Goody starting alongside him, and I don't think that's going to change. It's just I think Ballo will start instead of Renew, obviously due to the injury. But now you get that spacing around Ballo, and Ballo's such a physically intimidating player that most guys really can't stay with him one-on-one, just pure physicality wise. And you create those doubles, and Ballo, it's still not, where I think we want it to be, but his ability to pass out of the double team and making quick decisions, it's improved a lot from his time at Arizona. And those looks are going to be really open for guys like Mackenzie Mbako, Luke Goody. And I know Mbako statistically didn't, he had 16 points, 7 rebounds, solid game, 5 for 13 from the field. It was a team high plus 27 in that game. And, plus minus, it's a lineup stat more than anything. But Mbako's spacing is so important to this team. And when you have a lineup of him and Luke Goody on the court together, it opens things up for Miles Rice, opens things up for Ballo. And it just creates more spacing than the lineup of Malik Renew, Omar Ballo, where teams can kind of just pack the paint.
This may be putting you on the spot. So if you don't have a definitive answer, that's okay. But how would you grade overall, just, A through F, Indiana's performance last night, considering what was at stake? And I know it was just one of your opening conference games, but it did kind of feel like Indiana really needed to look the part in this game against Rutgers, and I think they did that for the most part.
Yeah, I'm kind of in between the B plus B range. I'm not going to give a definitive one or the other. I think Indiana played really well. They looked good. They did a lot of things well. Ace Bailey made a lot of heroic plays. Like this game was not as close as it kind of seemed if you're just looking at the box score. If Ace Bailey is not hitting some incredibly tough shots, Indiana probably wins this game by 15 to 20. But at the same time, I look at this Rutgers team, and I don't think they're very good. I think you take away Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, they're
in big trouble without both of them.
They probably don't win a game in the Big Ten if you take away both those guys. And it's one of those things that kind of baffled me when I looked at this team. Like, how could you not get a better roster behind these 2 studs? And so those, I mentioned it, I had a tweet about it. Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, they're going to win some big games for Rutgers just because of how talented those 2 are. But this Rutgers team is not good. They don't look like a tournament team. And when Indiana, it's hard to say because, they played great against Minnesota earlier this year and then, went to Nebraska and laid an egg against a pretty good team that probably is going to be in the tournament. So it's hard to say when you're playing these teams that probably won't make it to the tournament, especially with no Dylan Harper. And that's why it's harder for me to go anything higher than a B plus.
Well, and a team that will be, at least at this current point in time, I would think would be in the NCAA tournament, Penn State. That's Indiana's next opponent. They're 12-2. One of their losses, though, is to Rutgers. It was on the road, 80-76. Their other loss coming to Clemson. And I believe Clemson has had a decent year. I don't know what their most recent results have looked like. I know they upset Kentucky at one point during the season, but this being a road game for Indiana coming up, this has not been a friendly environment to the Hoosiers, and not that it's a difficult place to play because the Bryce Jordan Center, they can get up for big games, but Indiana has lost to Penn State teams in this facility when it's a ghost town. So Indiana they have a lot of monkeys that they got to get off their back this season, and on the road at Penn State feels like it's another one of those that they need to hopefully shake off this upcoming, or whenever this, when is this? This is Saturday,
Sunday.
right? Or Sunday, excuse me.
Sunday,
Coming up this weekend, I should say.
Yeah. I mean, Ace Baldwin, you look at Penn State, he is their guy. He's one of the best players in the Big Ten. On our in talking about the Hoosiers podcast, like Big Ten preview, he was Kyler's pick for Big Ten Player of the Year, and it's very deservedly so. I mean, he's averaging 15 and 8.5 assists a game. He killed Indiana last year in the two losses. Indiana went 1-2. They beat him in the tournament, did a good job against Baldwin in the tournament game. But at Assembly Hall, Baldwin went for, I think he had 22 and 8 assists in the win. And then in Penn State, 23 and 9 assists. He killed Indiana last year. They have to do a better job on him if they're going to want to, kind of get past some of these demons.
Yeah, we'll of course react to all of that either with a post-game wrap-up on Sunday or with In Touch with Indiana Sports on Monday. I do want to, while I've got you, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little NBA with our resident NBA expert. I don't know if that's the title you like to have, but
I
I've
appreciate it.
given
I like
it to
it,
you
yeah.
nonetheless. But something that with a little bit of a bit of double dose of local flavor here. The Heat and the Pacers played. I believe it was last night. And Kel'el Ware has a career night against the Pacers. Pacers now 17 and 18, one game below 500. Just I'm not really looking for Pacers analysis here, more so Kel'el Ware and his kind of experience thus far as a rookie and him having a really good night against the hometown team.
Yeah, I mean, Kel'el Ware, I'll be remiss to say, I mean, Indiana took care of this game pretty early. Like, this was not as, it's a 13-point win, but Indiana was down 25 up 25 going into the fourth. So Kel'el Ware got a lot of more playing time because of that. But he's been, quietly putting together a very good stretch. Obviously, career high 25 points, 9 for 11 from the field. The only real issue I see is no rebounds in 21 minutes. 3 blocks, though, kind of showing what he's able to do there. But since December 21st, he kind of made his return back into the lineup. He's played double-digit minutes in, I want to say, 8 games. And the minutes are continuing to grow, and he's really playing well for the Heat. But it's such an interesting thing because the Heat, coming into the year, they want to compete for a championship, but you could very clearly tell they didn't have the pieces. And then now you have, I'm sure you probably saw, I know we talked about a little bit, the Jimmy Butler stuff going on, where rumored Jimmy Butler, they were trying to trade him. Then Pat Riley openly said they weren't. And then Jimmy Butler last night, for those who didn't see, pretty much in the post game said he loves the city of Miami, but he is not having fun playing basketball for the Heat. And they asked him, would you be able to have fun here? And he's pretty much said no. And then pretty much requested a trade openly, which I've never seen a player do that in such a public way.
Do I get to do that now? Do I just go up to Alec and say, I am not having fun at HoosierIllustrated.com. I'm going to request a trade to name your website, whoever I can have more fun with.
No free ads here. But no, yeah, exactly. So it's such a weird thing, but I think for Kel'el Ware's career, a Jimmy Butler trade could wind up being a good thing in a sense if the Heat are kind of forced to rebuild, because then they're forced to play some of their younger guys more, let Ware develop. And it's something, like Jalen Hood-Schifino is a good example of this. He's a guy who came into the NBA. You saw the path for him to be like what kind of player he could be. But the problem was he went to a team that's trying to win now, and he needed, the developmental reps. And thing is, Hood-Schifino's, jump shot needed to improve, and he wasn't really able to play early on. And now you kind of seen him like, what is up with Jalen Hood-Schifino? Because he's just not in the rotation. And he really didn't want that for Kel'el Ware. And if Jimmy Butler's traded, it opens up a lot more minutes for Ware. I know, not same position at all. Bam's still there. But Ware's a guy who can play alongside Bam Adebayo. Just Ware's jump shot and Bam's ability to put the ball on the floor. It's not like a true, they cancel each other out. They're two guys that are, both bigs. I think Bam's 6'11", Ware's a 7-footer. Guys who are great shot blockers, good defenders. But they have like similar but different skill sets that they can play off each other. And it's something I'm kind of curious to see as we see more Ware minutes.
And then last time we checked in, I believe the Rockets were, at least at the time, had the best record in the NBA. That is no longer the case. Yeah. Have you changed your mind on who you think may be running the table when it comes to the NBA right now in the regular season?
The Cavs look awesome. They're so good. They're so talented. Kenny Atkinson has done an incredible job there. I still don't see them beating Boston in a 7-game series. I don't know if I think they can beat New York in a 7-game series. Even Milwaukee, I see them having a hard time with just because of Giannis. And out west, I think the Oklahoma City Thunder are definitively the best team in the West, the way they've played all season long. Chet Holmgren's been injured, their second best player. and he, will be back, I assume, for the playoffs. I still think the Rockets are fun, but without the playoff experience, I just don't think they're gonna really be able to make the noise they're hoping to make. I mean, I mentioned it last time I think I was on. I love Ime Udoka. The West is really fun because it's truly a mess. I mean, you look at the gap between the 4 seed in the West and the 11th seed, which is the Suns, the team a lot of people thought they were going to make a title. It's 4 games separating, hosting a playoff series versus missing the play-in. So it's one of those things where the West is so open and it's so early. There's going to be injuries. There's probably going to be trades. I would not be surprised if Jimmy Butler's traded out West. I've seen rumors of him to Phoenix and a potential swap with Bradley Beal. There's going to be a lot of action, I think, this offseason, and that's all this offseason, but even this trade deadline, because of the way the NBA cap works, it's like goes into the effect next year where the hard cap's set a little differently because of the new CBA, which kind of forces teams to either decide, hey, we're going to go all in, as like you've seen with the Celtics, who have a bunch of massive contracts, have a huge tax bill. Phoenix also does. And then you have teams that are, they're probably going to realize, hey, we're probably not going to win a championship with this core. And they're going to be sellers and try to get under the tax bill because teams don't want to be paying $50 million extra if they're not competing for a championship.
No one likes taxes, right? It is. No. I mean, it is that time of year, though, and not at least for the NBA franchises or whatever, but it is the time of year where you see tax ads because it is, of course, 2025, and it's the time of year where you don't like to see those pop up on your screen. But that's just where that reminded me of. But Drew, I appreciate your time and insight on all things basketball, and we'll check in again sometime soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.
Good stuff from Drew. Of course, always appreciate him coming on and for being the voice of reason. Maybe that's not the best way to phrase it. Just the expert, I guess, as I said, as I introduced him for the NBA, because I do follow it to an extent. But those of you who have been around long enough know that, my bread and butter when it comes to things I like to talk about the most is collegiate athletics. And if we're being even more specific, those that affect the Hoosiers. That's why this is called In Touch with Indiana Sports. So, we're not going to sit here and talk about Montana sports, although Montana State and North Dakota State are playing in the FCS championship. Not that anybody cares. Maybe I care. Maybe I don't care, but maybe you do. Maybe you're going to bet on the game. And speaking of which, I guess when we get to our college football playoff segment here in just a moment, I have some good betting news on my front. And it's probably, I can't remember if I shared this on the show or not on Monday. I do know I shared some early ideas of what I might bet on, but I hit a 4-leg parlay for the college football playoff, and it's my biggest hit of the year. And I'm not even just talking 2025. I'm talking about since the beginning of the college football season. So very excited about that. Get me feeling good about the old gamblings, and hopefully I can continue to carry that momentum into the Final Four and maybe beyond. But who knows? It's all luck. But I'll share what that was here in just a moment. But one thing I want to mention for Indiana basketball real quick that Drew and I failed to mention, or I should say I failed to mention, is shout out to Anthony Leal for that ridiculous buzzer beater at the end of halftime, or going into halftime, I should say. He's basically falling backwards as time expires. And he's able to get a shot off that goes in for Indiana to carry that into the locker room. And that ended up being Sports Center #1. So shout out to Bloomington's very own Anthony Leal for that. And then the performance overall, him coming off the bench. One thing Anthony Leal has always been really good at throughout his entire career in Indiana is just being a team player. And I really don't like how people kind of weaponized his speech. I guess, but it was his senior night speech last year. And of course, he took advantage of the COVID extra year of eligibility. So it was kind of a false senior night. And people got upset about how he used that platform that he was given to talk up his head coach, which, what do you expect? Do you expect Anthony Leal to go out there and say, all right, guys, I know they weren't expecting this, but I'm going to sit here and call for a change right now, Scott Dolson. This needs to end, or else I'm not going to stick around for a 6th year or whatever it was, 5th year. He's not going to do that. He's going to go to bat for his coach. And if he wasn't, he would have transferred. He wouldn't have done some nonsense like that. But anyway, people got upset about the way Anthony Leal and a few others did that. And I know Mike Woodson said some things at senior night as well that weren't necessarily the best look. I can say that. But one thing Anthony Leal, this is my main point with all of this, throughout his entire career at Indiana, has been very, very good at just being a team player. And whether that has been having a major role in games or just coming off the bench, he's always taken everything in stride. And I know part of that is him being a Bloomington kid and him being familiar with Indiana basketball for the entirety of his life. And I'm sure he will carry that into the rest of his life as he finishes his career here at IU. But just nice little Anthony Leal appreciation, because he's somebody who's been around for not the most fun time in Indiana basketball, and he stuck it out. Of course, there have been worse times. Of course, the early Tom Crean years being the first that come to mind, but he survived pretty much the entirety of the Archie Miller era, and then stuck things around through Mike Woodson, and has seen some success, and hopefully he and the rest of this team get to cap off this season with hopefully a better finish than they have had, for the other years that have happened for Indiana basketball under Mike Woodson, and even before that, of course. So shout out to Anthony Leal and all the good things that he's been able to do throughout his career. All right. I'm going to take a drink of water, and then we'll transition into some college football playoff discussion. I'm also having another one of those days where it's not, sometimes this is anxiety driven, but I'm having trouble catching my breath again. I think this is more of the after effects of dealing with all this coughing nonsense for the last week or so. So without further ado, though, getting back into the college football playoff stuff, but it's been so fun. So we'll just start. We'll go chronologically, right? We'll start with the first game. I almost called it the Friday night game. I know this game wasn't played on Friday. This is New Year's Eve. This was Penn State and Boise State. And I will coincide as I'm talking about some of these games. I'll talk about what I bet on as I go through the games, and then show you what ended up being the final 4-leg parlay that gave me such a nice payout. But Penn State defeats Boise State 31-14. In that game, I took Penn State minus, I think it was 11.5. Of course, they take care of that fairly easily. And Boise State, good stuff from Ashton Genty. They were, of course, kind of carried by him throughout most of the season. Not to say that the rest of their team wasn't good, because if they weren't at least some semblance of good, they wouldn't have won as many games as they had and gotten to the college football playoff. And they also wouldn't have been as competitive as they were against Oregon in the first round, or one of the early games this season. But Penn State, really kind of in a similar vein to Ohio State, they're hitting their stride at really the perfect time of the college football season, and the postseason that we're in now. Penn State in both of their games have looked very dominant. Now, you could argue that Penn State has had the easiest road through the college football playoff so far, getting to play almost at the ACC champion, but as the ACC runner-up, who is formerly of the American Athletic Conference, and then the Mountain West champion, Boise State, who, a G5 conference champion that normally under, I guess I almost said regular circumstances, but if things more so went chalk throughout the year, you wouldn't have had the Mountain West team get a bye like this. And you would have seen them, get somewhere like in that 5-12 where Clemson ended up being. Apologies. But Penn State has looked the part, and they are going to be absolutely challenged, of course, by Notre Dame in the semifinals. But look out, though. I think Penn State is just as much of a competitor for the national title as the other three who are in the semifinals. And they, of course, won the Fiesta Bowl. They'll go on to play in the Orange Bowl. bowl of oranges down in this is Miami. They played this game, something along those lines. But yeah, good stuff from the Nittany Lions. And of course, I mentioned the minus 11.5. That was what I took in that one. I hope everything that I took was something that I said on the show, because I'll feel kind of bad if there were people who took what I said and I end up changing. I think if I remember correctly, when I was talking about what I was going to bet on, I think I was pretty indecisive. So I don't think I had kind of set in stone what I was going to bet on. By the way, and I know there's also a group of you that listen/watch the show that don't care what I'm betting, and that's totally fine. But as always, I do like to share what I'm betting, because it is part of it for me. Again, not for everybody, but for me, and I enjoy it. And I know some of you, and maybe more than I realize, enjoy it as well. All right, moving forward, the absolute best game of the 4 that took place, and I'm sure many people might have even expected this to be the least competitive of the 4 games, and that was Texas against Arizona State, a game that ended up going to double overtime, a game where Texas was initially ahead by, I'm ready to cough again, so apologies. I did pause that time. I was initially looking for the mute button, but instead I paused the thing. But either way, back to what I was saying, Texas and Arizona State, a game that it looked like it was heading towards blowout territory. It looked very similar to really kind of how things were going with Indiana and Notre Dame in the first round. But things really began to shift for the Sun Devils whenever they got that safety against Texas. There was kind of a bobbled snap, if I remember correctly. And from there on out, they had a couple of trick plays that really kind of got their offense rolling by Cam Scatterbo. I keep wanting to call him Cam Scatterbo because of the way that when you write his name out, there's not a second O at the end. So you'd assume it'd be Bo instead of Boo. But he does it all. He runs, he catches, he threw a touchdown pass, and of course, he's not their quarterback. But for Arizona State to claw all the way back, send this thing to overtime, and the way that they lost, just so very unfortunate. Where Quinn Ewers, I tell you what, it's a great play. It's not like it was an unfortunate play that occurred that got Texas back into it, but Arizona State was up on, up a touchdown in the first overtime, and Texas goes for it on fourth and whatever it would have been. They needed to get a first down or get in the end zone, and Arizona State sends the entire cavalry after Quinn Ewers, and Texas responds exactly how they should, and they know they're going to have somebody open downfield, and that's exactly what ended up being the case. And Texas gets the touchdown, ties it up, scores, I believe, if I remember right, on the very next play in double overtime, and then Arizona State gets intercepted by one of the Texas defenders, and that does it for the Sun Devils. But competitive game, very exciting. And one thing I'm going to go ahead and address, because I keep thinking about it before I move on, is the conversation piece that has been brought up since Notre Dame won last night. And that was the fact that all the teams that advanced to the semifinals were those who had buys. And I think there is maybe some argument there, but Arizona State very well could have won that game, and some would say should, based on the fact that Texas had, I don't want to say they needed a miracle play to get to double overtime, but they had their back against the wall and they had to deliver, and they did. But they were a fourth down stop away from winning that thing. But the other 3, I was gonna say, I guess they kind of were blowouts. Ohio State, Oregon, which we'll talk about here in a moment, was a blowout. Notre Dame, Georgia, I guess you could say, I mean, it was a fairly competitive game, but that was not what people were expecting. Notre Dame to be pretty much in control for the entirety of the game. And I mean, I don't really want to go too deep into it, but part of it does show the seeding issues. I think Boise State, Penn State would have done much better with the bye, just by when it comes to overall strength of their personnel, I should say, and just knowing that they're more than likely the better team as they were. But Boise State, by all intents and purposes, with what was laid in front of them, deserved the seed that they got, because there was no way knowing at the time. I guess, you could assume based on what we've seen from other results, but there was no way in really knowing if Boise State was up to the same level as the rest of the teams. The only thing you could really compare it to was, well, they were competitive with Oregon, and that's all you really could say about them compared to anybody else. Maybe it's because I'm coughing, or I'm talking more now, but the coughing seems to be showing its head once again. I was not coughing as much as I was coming into this show, and but that's okay. We keep pressing on. Yeah, Texas advances, wins the Peach Bowl. They'll, of course, play Ohio State, who the Buckeyes have come out guns a-blazing, and they did exactly. Oh, by the way, before I even move forward, I just realized I didn't mention my parlay leg for those who care. Texas, I had Arizona State, so that doesn't make any sense. I had Arizona State covering, I believe it was 12.5 against Texas, and thankfully, Arizona State made it very competitive to where that ended up not being much of a sweat at all down the stretch. And heading into the next one that I was already heading into, Ohio State and Oregon, a domination from the get-go for the Buckeyes. Final score of 41-21, and that makes it seem, honestly, like it was a little more competitive than it was. It was a game where Oregon didn't get on the board until the very end of the second quarter. Ohio State had already scored, I believe, 34 points. They didn't need to do much in the second half in order to secure victory. And, Ohio State, based on their two performances and the caliber of opponents that they have faced in the postseason so far, they're the team to beat right now. And I think it's going to be tough for Ohio State to stop Texas, or vice versa. This coughing is really throwing me off, and I apologize. I'm trying to bring the energy. I hope I'm not letting you down. But I did not expect to be having to move away from the microphone as much as I was on Monday, but here we are. But back to what I was trying to say. Ohio State, I think they're going to be really tough for Texas to stop. And Texas being the only SEC team remaining. Another thing that I'm about to veer off to real quick. I'm so glad the narrative of the SEC being the only conference that matters in college football is hopefully, it's been shot down pretty much in every way possible by what we've seen, but unless Texas absolutely destroys Ohio State, which won't happen, and then moves on to do the exact same thing against whoever they face in the national championship, then that conversation's got to be put to rest. In this era of the transfer portal and NIL, where you can legally pay players, it is leveling the playing field when it comes to who the best conferences and teams are in college football. And the SEC is always going to be good, but so is the Big Ten. The ACC and the Big 12 aren't super far behind. They're further behind than they'd probably like to be, but things are a lot more wide open right now. You can look at all four of the teams who are in the semifinals, and all four of them are beatable. They've all taken losses for starters, but it just shows that the talent level is way more spread out, and I think that's a good thing. I'm sure those in the SEC don't like it, and that's why they don't like this format happening, because it also gives teams from lower seeds a chance. Look at that, for example. I don't think any of these teams, maybe Texas, would have been in a 4-team college football playoff, right? Because what would have happened is you would have had the SEC champion, which was Georgia. You would have had the Big Ten champion, which was Oregon. You would have had Maybe, I mean, would Boise State have gotten in? I guess based on the number of the seeds 1 through 4, which I'm looking at the bracket, which isn't the exact way that the seeds work out. Um, but yeah, it wouldn't have been what we have right now. So that I think that already shows that this format is working. You could argue though that you only need 8 teams based on that. Um, but either way, I'm just glad to see that parity is alive and well in college football. Um, and for that game, the parlay leg that hit, I had the over in the Ohio State Oregon game, which I think that was 56.5, ended up hitting 62. So good stuff there. Again, sorry for the long pause. I'm going to get through this playoff segment and then mention a few Indiana football matters, and then I'm probably going to hang it up for the day. Didn't really anticipate this cough coming back, and hopefully Monday. Actually, now I got one more thing to mention for Monday before we wrap things up, and something that may affect Monday, and it's not something that's in my control or anyone else's control. And some of you who live in the area that I live in may be aware of what I'm going to say. But we'll mention that towards the end of the show, just so I can leave you hanging with that. But finally, with the college football playoff, last night's result, game that got postponed due to the unfortunate tragedy, terrorist attack that took place in New Orleans. But Notre Dame defeats Georgia 23-10 in the All-State Sugar Bowl, game that I'm sure many people did not give Notre Dame a chance. And for a while, it was very much a back and forth, scoreless affair. But a few things can change, and they changed quickly as Notre Dame jumped out to I believe it was 13-3 lead at one point, maybe going into halftime if I remember right. And then, Georgia were just shooting themselves in the foot time and time again. They dropped a couple of open passes. One of them, I believe, would have been a touchdown catch if I remember correctly. But Riley Leonard, great game manager, does a lot on the ground, on a lot with his. He didn't throw a lot in the air. He threw less than 100 yards. But for Notre Dame to really have their first good college football playoff moment, and they did well against Indiana. I'm not taking anything away from what they did against Indiana, but whenever they're playing a team that they're not expected to do well in, because anytime Notre Dame has made the college football playoff, and in particular when they face a team from the SEC, they usually get boat raced, and that was far from the case yesterday. And of course, they'll now go on to face Penn State in the Orange Bowl, and I think that'll be a very competitive game. I don't know exactly what I think will happen, but this is the first time. Excuse me. This is one of the first matchups I've looked at and been really confident in from the get-go, that I think that this is one of those games, and Vegas will agree with me, it looks like, giving the spread in favor of Notre Dame for 1.5. But this is, for all intents and purposes, going to be a very competitive game, I believe. But the final leg of the parlay that helped me get to where I got the 4-leg hit was Notre Dame money line. I believe they were going to win, and I don't know what it was. I kind of always had the belief that whoever won between Indiana and Notre Dame was going to get the upset against Georgia. And not even just because of the backup quarterback stuff, because I know that was part of it for Georgia, but they've looked shaky all year long. They had the overtime win. The 7 or 8 overtime win against Georgia Tech. They also had a very close call against Kentucky. Of course, they lost a game to, was it Ole Miss? Was one of their losses Ole Miss? I'm not going to look it up right now. It's going to take too long to get to it. But either way, they've had plenty of questionable results. But of course, because they're in the SEC, they've always gotten the benefit of the doubt. And I do think beginning next year, at least I hope, maybe I'm wrong, maybe this is just wishful thinking, you're going to start to see some of the talking heads laying off the narrative that the SEC is far and away better than every other conference, especially if Texas doesn't win the entire thing. If the Big Ten wins back to back, whether it's Ohio State or Penn State, I mean, you're not going to see the 4-letter network giving, just shifting everything over to, the Big Ten is the almighty. But you definitely will see a turning of the tides in some way, shape, or form. ESPN, with all the SEC money that they are, money they're giving to the SEC and vice versa, it's not going to, they're not ever going to shift their allegiance. But it's still good for the Big Ten and the rest of college football if the SEC is not always as dominant as they had been up until the last couple of seasons. My apologies. I'm going to have to do this one more time. All right. That's it for college football playoff stuff. Let's get into a few Indiana football talking points. And again, I know we talked transfer portal stuff. There's not a lot new in the portal, but there is something new. And I believe this came out on Monday afternoon or Tuesday. Very important piece to Indiana's defense announced that he will be staying for another season. And he, in quote, is running it back, right? D'Angelo Pons. He was a big pickup for you in the portal last year. Again, I won't say it was unproven talent, but unproven at the power level. And he's going to get another shot and having another wonderful season with Indiana next year. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he'll be able to do with Indiana in a second season. And then lastly, I want a couple of updates for Indiana's former quarterbacks. We'll start with Taven Jackson. He is believed to be going on a visit with UCF, and that would be an interesting landing point considering Scott Frost would be the head coach. He is the new head coach down there. So that'll be an interesting landing spot if Taven Jackson ends up landing down in Central Florida, joining the Big 12. And why would Scott Frost, of all guys, want an Indiana quarterback? Didn't you want to beat up on those guys when you were at Nebraska? You needed Nebraska to schedule Indiana more. Sorry, guys. And then finally, Curtis Rourke. It came out the other day or today that he is having some revisionist surgery for an ACL tear that he apparently experienced back in August. And for him to go through the entire season with an apparent ACL injury that's going to get worked on, and to have I have this in front of me right now, nearly a 70% completion percentage on the year, over 3,000 yards passing, 29 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, the 5th best quarterback rating in the country at 85, an 11-2 record in a college football playoff appearance. I mean, you couldn't have asked for more, right? And it does make you wonder, like, could there have been even more that he would have done without the injury? Or was there that just a piece of the magic that only came to fruition because of they kept that under wraps all year long. And for good reason. Imagine all of the noise had that been public information. But shout out to Curtis Rourke for all he did. And I need to wrap this show up. I don't know what's going on with all of a sudden I'm coughing and now I'm sniffling, doing the sniffs or whatever. But maybe it's just because my voice doesn't want me going this long, talking in a row. But hopefully I'll be feeling better on Monday. But on that note, before we wrap up things, there is some inclement weather coming into my neck of the woods over the weekend. And for my other job, I will be staying in a hotel going into Monday morning. And there is a chance that things are bad enough that, and I don't know what to expect, severity of it, likelihood of it actually being super severe, I don't know. But there is a chance that if things are really bad, that I may not be able to even record a show for Monday. But I hope that's not the case. If it is, I'll, of course, put something up on social media. I'll probably make a post on the Hoosier Illustrated YouTube page as well. And if you're subscribed and you've hit the notification bell, you'll get that update. I don't believe messages on YouTube go out to subscribers who have not notified or hit the notifications bell. So if you want to be notified for something like that, hit the notifications bell right next to that subscribe button. And if you haven't done either one, feel free to do that right now. We very much appreciate it. And check out everything else going on at HoosierIllustrated.com throughout the weeks coming up as well. So until next week, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.